San Diego County is a step closer to offering residents more energy choices.
It allows communities to band together to buy and sell electricity and opens the door to competition.
Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, details on the vote by the Board of Supervisors and where community choice energy goes from here. Potentially dangerous research on local veterans, the VA confirms liver samples were taken from patients without their consent. And a new report reveals an increase in refugees settling in San Diego. The latest numbers. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening, I'm Ebony Monet. It's Tuesday, February 26th. Thanks for joining us. Today, the County of San Diego voted to look into the idea of starting a community choice energy program. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman says the county will then decide whether or not it wants to offer an alternative to SDG&E.
The idea behind community choice energy is that opposed to SDG&E, the county would be able to buy its own electricity and decide where it comes from, which could lower costs for ratepayers. The original proposal from Supervisors Diane Jacob and Nathan Fletcher called for the development of a community choice energy program by October, then looking at steps for implementing it.
It allows communities to band together to buy and sell electricity and opens the door to competition.
But Supervisors Greg Cox, Jim Desmond, and Kristen Gaspar expressed opposition to creating and implementing an energy program without first seeing results of a feasibility study.
I'm not really excited about getting into a new line of business that we don't know anything about.
I like all the outcomes that everybody's talking about it, but in the process, we don't have anybody on staff right now that's an energy guru. We'd have to have, and I'm not sure how many people we'd have to hire and how many people would be coming in and the costs of that implementation.
I'd hate to see us spend resources on something before we've come up with a business plan and before we've done a complete and thorough feasibility study.
Let me try changing some things.
Jacob quickly changed her motion to developing options for a community choice energy program and got rid of the implementation part.
That motion passes unanimously with all board members being present and voting aye.
Jacob has proposed looking into a community choice energy program in the past, but was unable to get support from the rest of the board.
I think it is a possibility. The fact that we got a unanimous vote today, where 2 years ago, my motion went nowhere.
Jacob believes a community choice energy program for the unincorporated county could offer lower prices than SDG&E. The board will know for sure when the feasibility study is completed by October. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
SDG&E is currently the only provider of electricity to the unincorporated county. The cost of the feasibility study is estimated at $125,000. Caltrans is moving forward with a plan to prevent suicides on the Coronado Bridge. Crews started installing spikes along the bridge wall today as a deterrent. In addition to the spikes, there are signs posted on the bridge with a hotline for people to call for help. Public health officials urge the public to know the signs that someone needs help. You can find resources at suicideispreventable.org. A recently uncovered report confirms serious noncompliance occurred at the La Jolla Medical Center. iNewsSource investigative reporter Jill Castellano has details about the human research on veterans.
In 2013, doctors at the San Diego VA wanted to participate in an international project to study alcoholic liver disease. As part of that project, they proposed collecting liver tissue from veterans. The doctors said they wouldn't do anything to patients that wasn't part of their normal treatment. So if a veteran with the disease happened to have a liver biopsy, the doctors would request access to any leftover tissue. But that's not what happened. An internal VA report published in October confirms researchers instead had extra liver tissue removed from at least 9 veterans during their biopsies. None of the patients were told this was happening, even though removing these extra samples increased the risk of serious complications like internal bleeding. Kyle Galbraith is a bioethicist at Piedmont Athens Regional Medical Center in Georgia. He says what happened to these veterans was pretty egregious.
We ask these individuals to serve with their time and their bodies and putting their lives on the line for our own safety and defense. And then I think they deserve to be treated with the utmost respect when they return home with great medical care. And certainly, not with being lied to in research studies. That's a slap in their face.
The VA report doesn't say whether patients were going to be told what happened, and it doesn't describe any discipline for the 2 researchers who ran the study. For KPBS, I'm iNewsSource reporter Jill Castellano.
iNewsSource is an independently funded nonprofit partner of KPBS. The House Judiciary Committee is taking aim at President Trump's controversial zero-tolerance immigration policy. Under the policy, more than 2,700 children were separated from their parents at the border last year. It was created by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions and criminally prosecuted anyone caught crossing the border illegally. Democrats on the committee say the Trump administration must be held accountable for any damage caused.
When a stranger rips a child from a parent's arms without any plan to reunify them, it is called kidnapping. This administration is responsible for the harm suffered by thousands of children and their parents, and it must be held accountable after all the children are reunified. That is why we must have a full accounting of which officials were responsible for directing and planning the shameful policy of kidnapping. Not only was the family separation policy abhorrent, the administration was either incompetent or grossly negligent in its implementation, which only compounded the trauma inflicted on these innocent children.
An internal watchdog report recently found that thousands more children than previously thought may have been separated before the zero-tolerance policy officially began. A new report claims thousands of migrant youth suffered sexual abuse while in U.S. custody. That's according to Health and Human Services, which alleges more than 4,000 unaccompanied minors were sexually assaulted between 2014 and 2018. Of the complaints, nearly 200 were against adult staff and hundreds more against other detained minors. The accusations range from being shown pornographic images to physical assault. More refugees are arriving in San Diego, according to new numbers from the State Department. The San Diego Union-Tribune reports 74 refugees arrived in San Diego County from October 2018 to January 2019. That's nearly double the same period 1 year ago when 40 refugees arrived. Most of the new refugees are from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The House of Representatives votes to revoke President Trump's national emergency declaration. President Trump announced the executive order earlier this month in order to secure billions of dollars in funding for a southern border wall. The House voted 245 to 182 in favor of blocking the declaration today. House Democrats say the vote is not about the wall, it's about the Constitution, and the declaration is an abuse of power.
If the president is successful in getting his way on this, rest assured he will come back. He will try this again, probably on other issues, as will future presidents. The Congress must step up, must reclaim its role over the power of the purse. This resolution is critically important to the future of the relationship between the legislative and the executive branches.
The bill now heads to the Senate for approval. However, even if it passes, the president says he will veto the bill. President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, arrives on Capitol Hill for 3 days of congressional appearances. It started today with a closed-door meeting in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Tomorrow, the public will hear from Cohen when he testifies before the House Oversight and Reform Committee. Cohen is expected to testify about President Trump, specifically details on his conduct in business and during the 2016 presidential campaign. Cohen will go behind closed doors again Thursday to speak to the House Intelligence Committee. KPBS Radio and KPBS.org will be carrying the Michael Cohen testimony live beginning tomorrow morning at 7. Meanwhile, President Trump arrives in Vietnam for the second summit with Kim Jong-un. The president and the North Korean leader first met last June in Singapore. The two are currently in negotiations over nuclear weapons. The U.S. is demanding complete denuclearization from North Korea, while North Korea wants relief from U.S. sanctions. President Trump and Kim Jong-un will meet one-on-one tomorrow. With the future of North Korea's nuclear arsenal unknown, U.S. Marines are preparing for anything. Associated Press reporter Heaven Daly takes us behind the scenes of the simulation training.
A steep climb, 8,000 feet high, up the snowy Sierra Mountains. But this is no backcountry adventure.
Hey, they're squirting to the left! Squirting to the left!
Hundreds of U.S. Marines are braving sub-zero temperatures and deep snow to take part in simulated warfare.
I got a 240!
It sucks, but death sucks even more.
Sure.
It's preparing them to fight in the most demanding environment in the world.
Face the tree line.
It's part of the U.S. military's pivot from fighting almost exclusively in the deserts of the Middle East over the past decade to preparing for climates in other potential conflict zones, including the extreme cold of North Korea and Russia.
In the Far East, whether it's in Northern Europe, etc., we're replicating that here. And what we're finding is that it's an extremely challenging problem. And it's a problem that frankly, if we don't train to, it's going to cost a lot of Marine lives.
I keep losing it.
The Associated Press got exclusive access to the U.S. Marines Mountain Warfare Training Center, where combat boots are worthless without snowshoes or cross-country skis.
Hands okay?
But having the most advanced protective snow gear doesn't make life much easier here.
You constantly having to dig or move up a mountain range, so it's physically taxing, but more than anything, I think it's mentally taxing on them.
Among the most difficult things about fighting in the snow is not only keeping yourself warm, but your equipment and your weapons functioning properly.
Kind of clean the weapon, make sure it's all nice and dry. We're trying to keep it dry, but due to the weather, it's impossible.
You can get a lot of parts failures. Things get really brittle in the cold. They like to break. One of the biggest ones that we see is, getting ice in your chamber and not able to actually get the gun into battery. So things that you have to be very cognizant of. As far as employment too, if they set up a machine gun and it's sitting on the snow, it's just going to sink into it. So we show them ways of keeping that machine gun afloat.
Important lessons as the unforgiving cold may become the next military hotspot. Haven Daily, Associated Press, Bridgeport, California.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, Congress takes on the president, voting to block the national emergency declaration and grilling his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
We're taking a look back at the murders of 2 San Diego women killed 15 years ago in a gang shooting. Today, KPBS investigative reporter Claire Tragesser brings us more details on how police and prosecutors build cases like this and how it impacts the community.
Usually when I talk to James Carter on the phone, he was so focused on how he says there was no evidence against him in the shooting at the Dr. J's liquor store. But in one conversation, he deviated from that script and started telling me about his favorite movies.
My favorite movies, my top 5, is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Cooley High, Grease, what's the other one? West Side Story. But I wanted oh, you laughing at me?
No.
Oh, that's cool. Claire, you laughed, messed up. What's so funny about that?
Those are good movies. This conversation made me realize Carter is a flirt. This fit with something I'd heard about him from other people, that he was good at charming the ladies. And this actually came up at his trial. His defense lawyer suggested at one point that people ended up naming Carter as the shooter because they didn't like him, since he was always stealing their girlfriends.
I think that they needed a conviction.
Layla Aziz knew Carter before he was arrested and says, yeah, people in Southeast San Diego didn't like him. She's now a head of Pillars of the Community, a nonprofit that advocates for criminal justice reform.
And so when you're working in a community and you need a conviction, you have to get somebody who's convictable. Did I make up a word?
No, she didn't. She says this happens a lot after a crime. Police find people with other convictions and try to get them to give up information in exchange for reduced sentences.
And finally they got a name that could stick with enough people who didn't care about him. He was a throwaway.
Robert Hickey, the prosecutor in Carter's trial, paints it differently. The district attorney's office wouldn't let me interview him for this story, but in an interview with the San Diego Union Tribune after the trial, he talked about collecting informants against Carter. There is nothing more believable on the witness stand than a career criminal when they tell the truth, he was quoted as saying. They're in a position to know. So who were these informants? There were 4 big ones who testified in the trial. 2 were jailhouse informants, meaning they were imprisoned with Carter and said that he told them he did the shooting. Both got less jail time in exchange for their testimony. Another was Earl Mcneil. He's the man who sparked protests in National City last summer because he went into a coma and died after police arrested him. We now know that Earl Mcneil was an informant for the district attorney's office for at least the Dr. J's case and possibly for others. After he testified in Carter's trial, the DA gave him almost $30,000 in expenses so he and his family could move away from San Diego. This is a big incentive for many informants, even if they don't get reduced jail time. It's guaranteed paid rent and food and a chance to maybe leave a bad situation in San Diego and start over somewhere else. This came up with the 4th informant in Carter's case, who will call SP to protect his identity.
I can end my family in this gangster lifestyle.
That's SP in a recorded interview with the prosecutor Robert Hickey. He shows what a hard decision it can be for an informant to decide to cooperate with police.
This is snitching, you know what I'm saying? This is against everything that I believe, you know what I'm saying? Everything that I've been grown up to understand.
Hickey tells him he knows it goes against the gang code to give information to police.
I understand the code, but also maybe you get a new code today.
SP clearly did not want to testify. In fact, he says at the trial that he only decided that morning to go through with it and that the district attorney had to keep him in jail to stop him from, as he says, ducking them and skipping testifying. But he ends up testifying that Carter was the main organizer of the shooting. He says he decided to go through with it because the DA has promised he likely will be let out of jail and moved out of San Diego for protection. He hopes this will give him and his family a fresh start.
We permit the government to pay its witnesses, and we permit the government to pay its witnesses in the most valuable currency you can imagine, which is their own liberty.
Alexandra Nadapoff sees deals like the one SP made as a problem. She's an expert on informants and a law professor at UC Irvine. She says offering people deals in exchange for testimony increases the likelihood that they will make up information.
But we also pay in the fact that, in effect, every informant deal is letting a criminal off the hook. These leniency deals are, by definition, a way that criminal suspects, criminal defendants are avoiding punishment for their own crimes, for their own wrongdoing, sometimes very serious criminals.
Letting the guilty go free is what Layla Aziz says happened in the Dr. J's case. She says she thinks James Carter didn't do it, and that to her shows the district attorney doesn't care about her community.
Because if you will convict a person you know did not do it, you don't care. That's where we get the wrongful convictions, the devastation, and that does not assist our community in being resilient.
Tomorrow, we'll hear more from Aziz and other Southeast San Diego residents about how they think their community should change in the future. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
For a longer version of this story and the rest of the series, subscribe to our podcast, San Diego Stories, or go to kpbs.org/J. Gene Case is the chairman of the National Geographic Society and the CEO of the Case Foundation, a social impact company that invests millions of dollars into ideas to change the world. I sat down with her to talk about her new book, Be Fearless, and 5 principles she lays out.
This work was born out of really some of my experiences in life. You know, through the different roles I've had, they've taken me all over the world to communities and in some cases remote villages, but across America too. And as I traveled, one thing I observed anywhere I went was that people everywhere have great ideas about how to make the world a better place. But often they're stuck in this idea that that can't be me, or I don't have what it takes. So the Case Foundation, which my husband and I co-founded, we engaged some research several years back to look at the core qualities of entrepreneurs and change makers and innovators. And what we discovered were these 5 principles that were present wherever transformational breakthroughs take place. But more importantly, and sort of more fun for us, we were able to debunk this idea or this myth that it takes something super special, a special quality, or going to the right school or having connections. Really, what we talk about in the book, what I wrote, is it's ordinary people that do extraordinary things.
To live in a world worth living in, we have to let challenge inspire us. We have to take risks, be bold, and let urgency conquer fear. We have to be fearless.
Can you describe a time in your own career when you had to overcome fear?
Well, I'll tell you, before I went to AOL, I was in a very comfortable position at GE in a marketing role. And I was clearly on track to, work through the company and be promoted. That was obvious to me. They had a very famous management training program at the time, which I had been through. And at the time, GE was the most valuable company in the world, and everybody wanted to work there. And then I get this call from this little startup down the road that no one's ever heard of, and they wanted to build a new online service, or we would call it an internet company today. And I had a choice to make. Was I going to stay where it was comfortable and things were good, or would I take a leap and take a risk for something that was really great? And I believe this young company would take risks that the big company was never going to be willing to take to break through in this new internet sector. And so I jumped.
And what about the advancements we have taken from the early days in your experience with AOL and just getting the information out to the masses to where we've come now?
Yeah.
What's your reaction when you just kind of reflect on how far we've come?
Well, I think those of us that were part of the internet revolution building it really believed in the power of democratizing access to information and ideas and communication. I personally saw that it could really level the playing field. I had been a scholarship kid at a private school. I didn't have access to the books and the volumes and the encyclopedias that others did. That was something early that was brought through the internet to level the playing field. But there's no question today, I think none of us would have imagined people walking down the street, on a crosswalk, looking at their phones. I think the pendulum will swing back. I think we're all a little uncomfortable with how far it's gone. And there's so much to still figure out around things like, privacy and ethics on these platforms, et cetera. And, my hope is that we'll see more progress in that area in the coming days. I think things grew so fast, they actually sort of beat the policy, if you will. Now policy has to catch up with where the world is.
Gene Case, author of Be Fearless, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ebony. It's been great to be with you.
Less than 10% of venture-backed companies are led by women, and less than 1% have an African-American founder or CEO. That's why the Case Foundation is currently investing in entrepreneurs who represent these groups. San Diego saw some cloud cover today, but it should remain dry for at least the next week. But that won't last for long. Meteorologist Erin Calandra has our forecast.
Good evening. Hopefully you are enjoying your day. Today, I'm sure you noticed maybe a couple of extra clouds around. We have these clouds coming in off the Pacific, still some sunshine, but perhaps a couple more clouds than we're used to. Taking a look at the big picture, there is a pretty powerful storm to the north of us, dropping several inches of rain north of the Bay Area. They're going to see flooding and mudslides. Not an impact on us, except we could see perhaps a light shower Wednesday night into Thursday from that system. So for tonight, we're at 51 degrees, mostly cloudy, and it's going to remain like that across the region tonight with those clouds. Oceanside at 45, Ramona reaching 39 for the low temperature. On Wednesday, again, mostly warmer and also some sunshine, a few clouds. Wednesday night is when we do have a chance of seeing those showers popping up. Taking a look at the temperatures tomorrow, 67 in Ramona, San Diego at 65, and in Borrego Springs, we're close to 80. Mostly sunny, but again, a few clouds lingering around. And by the weekend, there's a greater chance of seeing some rain creeping in on Saturday. With that rain on Saturday, we could see about a half to 1 inch along the coast, maybe a little bit more in those interior areas. Until then, though, enjoy the sunshine. We'll be in the 60s. And on Sunday, we should rebound. Inland, expect to see those showers Saturday and Sunday. And temperatures will remain in those upper 60s. In the mountains, sunny, temperatures in the 50s, so still pretty cool here. And in the deserts, it's going to be great. Lots of sunshine, nice, staying dry throughout the weekend. And our temperatures will remain mostly in those mid-70s this week. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
Now, a recap of today's top stories. San Diego County Board of Supervisors vote to consider developing a community choice energy program, which would give residents options of where to buy electricity. More refugees are settling down in San Diego. A new report released by the Union Tribune claims 74 refugees arrived in San Diego County from October 2018 through January 2019, which is double from a year ago. And Caltrans is moving forward with a plan to prevent suicides on the Coronado Bridge. Crews started installing small spikes along the bridge today. For today's top stories, go to kpbs.org.